Hello, everyone. I'm Cindy Wildish Rasmussen, and I'm the Application Portfolio Manager for Marshfield Clinic Health System. For the past 15 years, I've been working in a variety of roles in IT here at Marshfield Clinic. I am a native of this area. I've been a Marshfield Clinic patient my entire life, and as are my friends and family. So technology business management is really important to me because I have a vested interest in making sure that Marshfield Clinic is able to provide high quality care, world-class care at a price that people can afford.
Hi, I'm Monica Braun. I am the TBM practice manager at Marshfield Clinic Health System. Like Cindy, I've been a part of this community my entire life. Myself born at Marshfield Clinic. My children were born at Marshfield Clinic. So I additionally have a vested interest, and as you'll hear us talk about throughout the presentation, TBM has a lot in cost management and optimization and value add for the organization. So a little bit more about Marshfield Clinic. Many of you in the central and northern Wisconsin area probably know more about us. We were created over 100 years ago by 6 physicians who decided to start a group practice. Over the last 100 years, we've grown a lot. We are now in 34 communities within 55 clinical locations. We have 10 hospitals, which less than 1 year ago, we had 7. And less than 3 years ago, we had 1. We additionally serve our communities with dental clinics, pharmacies, a health plan, laboratories. Within IT, we have about 300 staff. We manage 1,700 applications, and we have 175 services in which we provide to the health system. As you probably know, with being familiar in the state, we do service central and northern Wisconsin, which are very rural areas of the state. And with that comes some challenges. There are a higher population of elderly, higher population on Medicare and Medicaid. So it's very important for us to keep our costs down and ensure that we can continue providing the medical care to our communities. So TBM, what is it? TBM is a value management framework that centers around cost, consumption, and performance. The TBM framework spans supply and demand to enable a fact-based trade-off between decisions needed to optimize spending and accelerate change. And as you heard, Marshfield Clinic is changing a lot. Now we're going to touch base throughout the presentation on one component or one area of the TBM framework, which is on the 4 disciplines. But as you guys are listening, one thing to note is TBM is not all about cost cutting. It's not just looking at where you can cut costs, but really truly learning about what the services are that you are providing to your business area. So what goods and services is the business consuming from IT? Is IT valuable? Will or would the business spend money on your services? And how can we add value? So are we setting the business up optimally? The overarching goal of TBM is really to run IT like a business. Those 3 things I just noted: understanding your goods and services, would people, purchase your services? A lot of that sounds like running a business. So here at Marshfield Clinic Health System, that's what we try to do. We run IT like a business, which means managing our IT department and IT spend for investments and cost controls, understanding what IT services are being consumed and where they're being consumed, and measuring IT performance for the organization. So we see all of those type activities being done on a daily basis at the health system. So during COVID, IT partnered with the business as our business was changing very rapidly, to enable telehealth to ensure that our physicians could still see our patients. That was something that was really spun up, trained, technology purchased and implemented within the first week of the COVID pandemic. Additionally, we look at what resources are used to deliver all of those projects or all of those services. How are resources cobbled together to run the business and support applications and our services. So again, TBM is really just a management framework, which allows all of the connections to be made around our cost, consumption, and performance. And then report out to our IT leaders, which allows them to make decisions that improve the efficiencies, the growth, the return on capital, and really just to add business value.
All right, you heard Monica mention the goal of TBM is to run your IT department like it's its own business. Managing investments you're making in IT products and services to align with corporate strategy. One of the primary impacts of doing that is that your resources start to shift from supporting activities focused on keeping the place running. I think all of us in IT understand that we spend a lot of resource really just trying to keep things working, right? So it's shifting focus from keeping the place running to activities that are actually taking your business forward. So projects are analyzed based on whether they will actually advance the business in some meaningful way and support the growth of the organization. Of course, there's all the work that just needs to be done every day to maintain operations, but the goal is to minimize run the business work and to maximize your change the business work. One example or one way that you can do this is by looking for routine, repetitive work that is happening in your organization and finding a way to automate it. So are you still doing desktop installs manually? What are you doing every day that is taking your time away from things that are more high priority for your business? So getting your teams to a spot where routine work is minimized is one way to move the dial toward change the business. So that's a key concept of technology business management, reducing the time and effort spent on day-to-day operations and increasing IT resource allocation toward activities that change the business.
So we're going to talk about the 4 disciplines of the TBM framework today to talk about how we at Marshfield Clinic adopted these disciplines and how we then turned it into practices and so forth within our organization to do just that, to reduce our run the business and increase our change the business. So we didn't invent the TBM 4 core disciplines or any of the framework. This was really a development by CIOs, CTOs, IT leaders, which were all interviewed and studied for many years, and really out came this framework, which, as we're going to talk about today, had these documented 4 disciplines. So they are create transparency, deliver value for money, shape business demand, and plan and govern. So at the core of all of these 4 disciplines is the basis of generating cost transparency. Cindy will touch base a little bit more on just the overall creating transparency. And cost is definitely one of those facets in that area. But cost transparency is also the key to delivering value, shaping your business demand, and planning and governing for the future.
Okay, creating transparency. Creating transparency is all about data. Gathering up the data and getting it in front of the people who are making decisions. And that's really 3 core areas, at least in our world. We want to create transparency out to the business. We want to create transparency within our IT department, and we want to create transparency for the finance areas. So in the business areas, for us, these are our departments. For example, cardiology or pediatrics. We want to be able to show them the total cost of the services they consume from IT. So hardware, software, support costs, so that they're able to make better decisions and manage costs for the organization. So for IT leaders, this takes a different form. Often that is a discussion of overlap and resources. Providing IT leaders a list of the applications they own and the services that they're responsible for to the business leads to discussions such as, do we really need 2 imaging applications? Or do we need multiple applications that all print physical therapy exercises? Having this overlap increases cost, and even more importantly, it reduces the breadth of the support that we can provide to our users. So we simply cannot know and understand applications at the same level when we have too many on our plates. You heard Monica earlier say we have 1,700 applications in our portfolio. So that's a lot to manage. And since the advent of TBM, we've been doing what we can to consolidate that. So for finance, creating transparency for finance, finance is an area that has always been very data-driven. But what we want to do is put more and better information specific to the IT costs of the organization and get that in front of finance. So prior to implementing TBM in our organization, knowledge like this, it was here, but it was compartmentalized and it was tribal. Efforts to gather data took a lot of time and resource, and frankly, a lot of email. We are now well down the road to making the data, both our IT cost data and our application data, as well as our service data, transparent and much more easily accessible to business, IT, and finance.
So we then take all of that transparency, as Cindy mentioned, the costs, application services, and we apply a cost to all of that, which really allows us to have the conversation if we are providing value. Now, value is in the eye of the beholder, which, as Cindy mentioned, was really our business units. So how do we know if we're delivering something when we are not the eye of the beholder? The transparency that we created, and really that discipline number 1, ultimately leads us to the documentation we need to have the conversations. So we go out and have conversations with our business partners, so between the business partners and IT, to talk about, do they find value in the services that they're getting from IT? Now, even when the business views our services as favorable, they know they need to use them, they enjoy using them. When you're applying that cost, they can also still think that they're too expensive for what they're getting, which lessens the value we're delivering. So now that doesn't necessarily mean that they should go out and purchase services from other people or spin up their own IT department. I mean, we're not saying anything like that. But what it does is you need to have that conversation. You need to be an advocate for your IT. And what we found is, as we have the conversations with the business, we learn a lot more about our services and our costs within our IT areas, but also how our business needs to use them. So for an example, a few years ago when cloud was really a big thing, we had many business partners who were getting emails or solicitations from AWS or other cloud vendors. And a particular service that they were getting a lot of emails on was the backup services that they provided. And it was much cheaper than what we were showing the business through our transparency and the cost of our service. So we needed to research, what was AWS selling? How was their service different than what we had? And that we were delivering. And we found a lot of differences, actually. They didn't provide an archive service, or they didn't provide a recovery service within that sale price they were getting. So really, the cloud service was only selling a subset of the service that we were providing. So as we're looking at this discipline, it really isn't just about cost, but aligning to your services, or understanding what your services are, and being able to have a conversation with the business of what you are truly selling of that service. Now, as we went through this whole process, we also understood that the business didn't need, quite that Cadillac service. So what we had done at the health system is really broke out our services into a tiering model, so we could understand who needed that, tier 1 service, and who could have a lesser service, which also is cheaper services, right? So IT didn't have to purchase as much hardware or software, or it wasn't as large in our data center to be hosted by. And what that did is, just through those conversations of understanding what our business needed, what they value, IT was able to reduce its cost of its backup by 83% per gigabyte within a few years of the service. So just looking at, that transparency, having a conversation with the business to understand if the business values that service, or if they pay for that, is it worth what they're paying for, allowed IT to save money.
Okay, our third core discipline is shape business demand. Shaping business demand, we have a really good success story around how we shape business demand at Marshfield Clinic Health System when we implemented the tenets of TBM. I'm going to share that in a moment after my little spiel here. So misspent IT resources and misaligned portfolios are typically the result of poorly managed demand. They're not due to IT being lazy, inefficient, or spend happy. They're due to the inability for us to change the conversation from using more technology to discussing the value of the additional investment. So looking at IT from the eyes of your business partners, they see that consumer technologies, hardware, freeware are dramatically cheaper, as Monica mentioned, than what they're getting from you. Well, that license is only $19 a month. What's the big deal, right? Business users do not see the total cost of supporting their applications and services over time. And they also fail to understand or care, maybe, about their role in actual IT spending, since it's not their checkbook or resource being consumed. So to be clear, IT departments that have had limited visibility into how their budget is being consumed and by what assets or services will find there are areas where costs can be reduced quickly when they employ the practices of TBM. So, for example, identifying and decommissioning orphan servers or helping business units rein in application licensing are good examples of ways that costs can be reduced quite quickly once you're aware the problem exists. However, when business leaders are not held accountable for, or at least informed of, the costs they drive, no one, neither IT or the business, can act effectively to reduce cost. So making cost transparent is eye-opening to business leaders, and moving the cost of consumption to their department or cost centers is even more so. So here's that story I was going to tell you about shaping business demand. For those of you who are from around here, which it's Central Wisconsin IT Conference, right? So probably are from around here. You may have heard of something called MCIS. So a few years ago, Marshfield Clinic spun out the IT department as its own separate company called MCIS. In doing so, departments, I mentioned before, cardiology, pediatrics. When I say departments, it's those areas in the clinic and hospitals that I'm talking about. So departments started to be charged directly for their IT services. Just like a customer, they received a monthly invoice and were paying IT for the services. Well, the leaders of those departments are very watchful of the money coming out of their cost centers, and they were quick to question the items on the invoice. Well, as you might expect, unused equipment started to be returned to the IT doc. The extra phone in the drawer and the peripherals laying around the department started to be returned. Oh, I don't need these extra 2 PCs anymore. Licenses were reviewed. I don't need 30 licenses for that app. There's only 15 of us using it. So licenses were reviewed and reduced to the number needed. And entire applications were found where we were paying invoices and no one was using the app anymore. Okay. Until or before we actually put those costs on an invoice, handed it over to the department, we didn't get that kind of feedback. The impact of making the business areas directly responsible for their IT consumption was incredible. So if someone else is paying your bills, you don't really care if they go up, right? I mean, I think of health insurance. If the insurance company pays your bill, you're less likely to scrutinize every line item on the invoice than if the money's coming from your own pocket. So shaping business demand is a natural result of creating transparency and putting it out there to the business.
So the fourth discipline and the last one we're going to talk about today is plan and govern, which is really planning and applying governance to ensure that you're, working with the business or seeing that value. So essentially, it's just planning, which generally turns into an IT budget or forecast or whatever the phrase may be. So this isn't just, however, finance asking for how much more are you going to spend, or in the rare situation, right, how much less are you going to spend in the next year. But it's really the process of documenting and communicating what is happening over the next year in the health system's current situations. As we mentioned, we have had a lot of growth. So at the beginning of the year or throughout the year, it's that conversation. How much growth are we having? What does that mean? What services does IT need to contribute to ensure that we are optimizing that business? But all of that documentation and communication really gives the CIO a platform to then communicate what that value is, communicate the opportunities that we have to improve the business, and to align our IT portfolio and spend to that of the needs of the business. As we've been going through the growth and COVID and different things, the CIO is working directly with those businesses to understand where is IT needed to ensure that we are continuing, our business plans, which is really just helping those patients, however we can. So in the planning and government stage, what really does the TBM, or having the cost transparency and the value add and so forth, what does that all add? It really adds the ability to link everything together. So in the first discipline, Cindy had mentioned really creating that transparency, having a list of all of our 1,700 apps and all of our services. So what the discipline of TBM does is it really allows you to link all of that together. Whether it be your money, your people, hardware, software, linking all of that together to understand how much does an application cost, what's the total cost of application, total cost of ownership around that application, and then to understand what business units consume that service. So in turn, you can really quantify and understand the relationship between all of them. So as I mentioned, Marshfield Clinic Health System has grown a lot. And in the past few months, we had acquired an Ascension Hospital in Weston, St. Clair's Hospital. And as we were going through that planning process, many areas who don't have something similar to a TBM could think that to be a long, hard process. But we are turning around these budgets or these planning cycles very fast. And it's because of the practices of TBM and really all of the relationships we have around all of our applications and services. So we're given a few high-level drivers of costs. How many beds are we acquiring? How many FTEs will we be acquiring? And then understanding, what practices do they have, cardiology, pediatrics, and those types of things that Cindy had mentioned about. And then really looking at what are all the services and applications in which they need, and understanding those drivers of costs. And then we have our budget or our planning cycle done for those areas. So we can take advantage of limited data coming in and ensure that we have the planning and budget cycles ready and needed for those expenditures. So again, just to recap, the 4 core disciplines that we just discussed were creating transparency, deliver value for money, shape business demand, and then plan and govern. So with these in mind, Cindy's gonna, or actually I'll take the next slide, but we're gonna go in and talk about how at Marshfield Clinic Health System, the TBM team, how we created our goals and our structure and so forth around this to be successful at the health system. So if we recall the 4 disciplines that we just talked about and kind of look at the 4 goals that we have on the screen, you'll see that they, are almost just a rewording of what we had just talked about. Better financial transparency, really creating that transparency. Increase cost efficiencies of run the business spending. Remember, Cindy mentioned we want to be less run the business so we can have more spend to put towards change the business. Improve conversations and decisions with our business partners, ensuring that we're shaping that demand with the business. And accelerate our service-orientated model. So in being able to increase our service model. So change the business, get those services deployed faster as we're growing so much in the organization.
Okay, so we have looked at the 4 core disciplines of TBM, and now I want to share with you, and this slide shows how we have implemented this at Marshfield Clinic Health System. So the graphic shows what we call the practice areas of TBM. The TBM office is part of our IT department. So Monica and I are both within the IT department. Many places their TBM office sits in their finance department. So we're kind of unique that way. So our TBM office is in our IT department. Each bubble on the graphic has someone, a person who's in charge of planning and implementing the practices of TBM and incorporating that into our company. So Monica's practice is IT financial management, and I am responsible for the practices of application portfolio management and business relationship management. We're part of a team of people working to foster TBM ideas into our organization. So just a little bit around that. Of course, the name might say it all, right? Monica's focus is on cost and finance. My focus is on apps and application ownership and understanding the application usage within our organization. So what our teams, and there's more of us, so there's a person for each bubble, as I'd mentioned. What we do is we work to outline processes and procedures. We work to educate leaders, and we have implemented systems to assist our IT teams in decision making. So Monica has worked to implement a cost transparency tool. It allows IT leaders to review the cost of their solutions. So they pull up a solution or app name, and it rolls together the cost of the software itself, of buying it, the cost of any related hardware, and then support. We have the support costs because we use a time tracking tool where we apply our time, our support time can be applied right to an application level. So we can look at an app and say, yeah, that, like earlier I said, that license is $19, right? What's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that it really is $10,000 a year because of all the stuff that we have to do to keep that app running. That was probably an exaggeration, 19 to 10,000. But as an example, it pulls together all of that stuff and puts the number out there for IT to look at. So, so the cost transparency application that Monica administers relies on an application portfolio, and that's a system I administer. This was built out as a TBM practice area and shows that we own, as stated earlier, 1,700 applications in our organization. This is also data in the hands of decision makers that they didn't have previously. So Monica's cost transparency application uses my app portfolio, and we can get to the cost on each of those 1,700 applications in our organization. Leaders then use those tools that we have implemented to look for things like zombie servers. Monica created a zombie server dashboard. So this, it grabs data out of our app portfolio and pulls it into the cost transparency tool and says, hey, this is an app that is decommissioned, but we have this server allocated to this application. Why do we still have 3 servers standing for an application that's no longer used? So that dashboard puts information in front of people so that they can look for cleanup opportunities. They can look for overlap in functionality. I mentioned earlier, why do we have 3 systems that basically do the same thing in some cases? And that's a real thing here at Marshfield Clinic Health System. You heard Monica say we went from 1 hospital to 10 in the last 3 years. Well, we absorbed all their IT, all their apps, all their systems, and we try and we're working to consolidate. So hospital 1 and hospital 2 are using the same IT systems, but we really obtained a lot in those acquisitions, a lot of more IT overhead. So we can look at things like we have 3 systems that all are imaging systems being used in different places. How can we get a project around that? How can we work to decom one app or to come up with a system standard for that functionality that system, that tool provides to our users? So we can also look at systems to understand whether they are delivering value in line with their costs. So Monica talked about delivering value for your money. So you can see things like there are 5 users and this thing costs $50,000 a year. Is it worth that? And you have to have that conversation because it very well could be worth that. But it really gives you an idea of whether what you're paying is worth if you're getting that much benefit from that tool. So we can also see what systems are costing us more in time and resources, as well as straight up money out the door to pay for their products and services from the vendors. Of course, we can't do this alone. It takes a whole bunch of people behind each of those bubbles to support this work. So what we did when we implemented the practices of TBM was we realized that we needed to create a structure to support the practices of TBM. So we actually did that in the form of a reorganization of our entire IT department. So we used the TBM taxonomy and what is called its healthcare extension to categorize our services. The TBM taxonomy is a countrywide, worldwide taxonomy, and it's a list of standard IT services offered by most organizations. And we took and aligned our apps to their taxonomy and their service taxonomy. So to give you an example, what that means, one area identified on the TBM taxonomy, and you can see it on the slide, is cardiologies. So it's a 3-tier taxonomy, and cardiology is the 3rd tier. So we took that taxonomy layer and put a label on each of our applications that support the practice of cardiology. And then we identified a person in IT who would support that function. So we have the line between the taxonomy, cardiology, the application, I'm going to throw out a name, Muse is a cardiology app, and then an IT leader who then supports that function. And then that IT leader, which we call a solution owner, has a tie to the cardiology department, works with the cardiology department to find out if they're getting value for their money, and if they're consuming all the resources, all the licenses. But putting names on things was a big deal for us. It really was a game changer. So each layer of the taxonomy was then assigned a solution owner, the IT person responsible for making sure the apps and services provided to the business were working as needed. And then those teams also consist of a solution analyst who was assigned to work the technical side of the solutions, and a learning analyst who's identified to help with user adoption, tool configuration, and making sure the tools are able to be used so that they do provide value. So we turned this in, we have had this structure in place for about 2 years at Marshfield Clinic Health System. And I'll turn this over to Monica to talk a little bit about the impact on the larger organization of implementing TBM.
So I'm just going to summarize here kind of quickly. Maybe we'll have a few minutes for questions. As Cindy mentioned, we have a ton of success stories. We developed our first cost model, which was really, again, just creating that cost transparency, aligning to our services and applications. We started it in 2012. We've been maturing the entire time. Applications became a big maturity area for us in about 2017. So as we've matured, we've just had many, many success stories. I'm just going to go through one quickly. We had our finance area come to us and ask a question about an invoice. Hey, do you know what this invoice is? I didn't. I sent it over to Cindy and said, hey, can you help me with this? She had looked up the application in the application portfolio, found that it was a decommed or an inactive application. So what that meant is she went out to that IT solution owner that she had showed you on that last page, who's owning the application, confirmed with them the status, and it was an inactive application. So that invoice and contract was all decommed, and those savings were almost, I'll say, kind of instantaneously received. We didn't owe the vendor that money. We had, canceled the contract and so forth. But a really, interesting facet to this is there was also hardware that was sitting on the receiving dock, hardware we received as part of this contract. So not only did just having an application, marked as inactive in the application portfolio led to an invoice savings from the vendor, it also led to us having a conversation with supply chain and, returning hardware and getting a credit for that. Overall, this was $1 million savings, and it took a few emails, one conversation with the IT owner, a connection with the vendor, and really then a few things just to get straightened up, and it was $1 million savings. So again, create transparency, have IT in the right place to talk with the business, and having all of that transparency has really created a culture change for the health system to ensure that we're receiving that value that we talked so much about today. If you do have any questions, I think you can put them in the app. I don't think I've seen any questions come through. Maybe I don't know how to use the app too well. But if you do put them in there, Cindy and I will get back to you. We do also have our contact information on the slide. Feel free to contact us and we can answer any questions.
Yep, and thank you for taking part of your Saturday to attend our session today.